Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, we give a show update. We talk to Fred Wagner about the short and long-term outlook on the Supreme Court's decision on Chevron deference. We also talk about the Olympics. And finally, here are some fun facts about the games. The first one took place in 776 BC, though the games as we know them now started in 1896. The gold medal was originally solid gold, but is now ironically mostly silver. And just to round it out, from 1912 to 1952, artists such as architects, painters, musicians, sculptors, and writers would also compete for medals. Why don't we bring it back? That's all I'm saying is maybe we could bring that one back. I would like to, toss my name in the ring. I'm just saying I'll write something, I'll say something. Can we have podcasting in the Olympics? Is that possible? I don't know. I think we do great. All right, hit that music. Today's episode is sponsored by Venable LLP. Venable is one of the nation's leading law firms. Venable's management reflects a commitment to diversity and inclusion through a broad category of hiring, training, and educational activities. The firm's environmental practice group works with clients across the country on major infrastructure development, including NEPA compliance and resource agency permitting. Venable encourages volunteer activities in professional environmental associations as reflected by Fred Wagner's membership on the NAEP Board of Directors. Let's get to our segment. Hey, everybody. Just wanted to give everyone a quick and wonderful update on the show. We are still working through planning out some season arcs for the show. We're doing a couple of different things. Hopefully more updates coming as we go. We are working on a lot of new and interesting things. I would love to tell you more about them. Believe me, I would. But once we get that all finalized, we are going to come back better than ever. We are really, really excited about that. And in the meantime, we do have one of our great guests back to talk about something really important in the environmental space. So if you are not aware of the Chevron deference, the decision made by the Supreme Court to do away with it, it's a really great listen. It's a great listen anyway, because Fred is always going to be good. We promise there will be more updates as we go. We may be doing a couple more of these before we get all the way back into full swing, but it is coming. So worry not, there's more to come. But until then, please listen to our next episode with Fred Wagner. Let's get to our interview. Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Fred Wagner of Venable LLP and our official environmental legal correspondent back on the show. How you doing, Fred?
I'm doing great, Nick. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. We're really happy to have you back on here. And before we dive into what has truly been a monumental past few months, the Olympics are going on right now. So let's talk a little bit of Olympics coverage, and then we'll dive into the really nitty gritty stuff. So, are you a big Olympics person? How do you feel about the Olympics being in Paris? What are your thoughts there?
I'm a big Olympics fan. In fact, when my wife was pregnant with our first child, we called up my mother-in-law and informed her that she would be babysitting for said child because we were going to the Olympics. So Mary was like, a month pregnant or something. It was very early on.
Right.
We had already planned and made tickets to go to Atlanta in 1996.
Oh, yeah.
And, Olympics are really big in my family because not only am I a big Olympics fan, grew up with it, big, meaningful events in my life, the 1972 Olympics and the Israeli athlete disaster and all this kind of stuff. Mark Spitz, just made big impressions on me growing up as a kid. But my wife and I had our first date watching the Winter Olympics.
Really?
We did.
Oh, wow.
We did. It was the last day in the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics, where the Mayer brothers, the American skiers, won gold and silver in the same slalom event, the last event. And I found out and my girlfriend, my wife, was an avid skier, so she was all excited watching the closing ceremonies, and I love the Olympics, so we hit it off. So the Olympics mean a lot to me for a whole variety of reasons. So we went to the 1996 Olympics and dropped off our infant with our mother-in-law, and we watched the events, and it was just a monumental experience. We were in the stadium when Michael Johnson won the 200 meters. You remember he wore the gold sneakers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Racing
Oh
around
yeah.
the track. We were there when Carl Lewis won his last gold medal in the long jump. We were present for that.
Oh, that's really cool.
We got to see the Dream Team, the first time the American Basketball Dream Team was put together.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and that was unbelievable. I've never seen a competition where the opposing team was asking for autographs from the other
Yeah,
team
right.
during the game.
Yeah.
Like they
Oh,
were walking up to Charles Barkley with paper. It was like the game is still going on, and Barkley is signing progress. They're taking pictures. It was a
yeah.
great experience, and we went to sort of off events. I don't know how to describe it. Like we went to
Right.
handball. Do you even know about
Right.
handball?
Yeah.
It's a great, exciting sport, and the
Mhm.
cheering and the singing. It was just a great experience all around. So yes, I'm very excited for the opening ceremonies. Watching them on TV tonight. We've got the popcorn popped and
Right.
the beverage is ready to go. I think it's gonna be a 4 hour opening ceremony.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll be in there for the long haul, but it's some of my favorite 2 weeks of every year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's always a lot of fun. And I don't know, do you have a preference between like winter and summer? It sounds like your wife might, but for you, did you like one of the over the other?
I'm a big Summer Olympics fan. It's something about the diversity of the sports and the
Yeah.
different types of athletes. When we were walking around Atlanta, that's the thing that struck us. Like we went to the cycling events in the velodrome,
Yeah.
and we were like this close to the athletes. We were right next to them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're waiting in line to get a snack at the concession stand right near us, and
Yeah.
they're like these stick figures. They have their shoulders and their hips are like on one straight line,
Right.
and then their thighs and their legs are like twice as big as their waist,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you would go to the wrestling venue and you'd see these
It's the act
these
opposite. Yeah.
guys walking by that are so huge, and then like everybody in between, and just to see humans at their best, right, at their
Yeah.
most fit, at their most developed athletic form, but in all different variations depending on the sport that they were involved in. It was just fascinating and amazing. So I'm a big Summer Olympics fan.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's a lot of fun, and yeah, it's always a good time. So I'm excited. I'm glad. I hope you enjoy the ceremony. I hope it's a really fun. I'll be watching it too. So, yeah, that's great. But we do have a ton to get to today. We keep saying it every time we talk that this is an unprecedented time, right? It's the words we keep using over and over again. And it came to pass. Chevron deference is no more. We knew it would happen. You predicted it would happen, and here we are. So before we dive into like the nitty gritty, can you kind of just remind our listeners a little bit of background on Chevron, just in case they haven't heard you talk about
Sure
it before?
thing. Well, the Chevron deference principle was established 40 plus years ago.
Hmm.
And it said that when there's an ambiguous statute that executive agencies, federal agencies interpret for purposes of implementing their regulatory programs, unless it was completely, arbitrary, the court should defer to the agency's interpretation of those ambiguous statutes. And as we know, in many, many instances, Congress presents ambiguous statutes
Yeah.
because they're not the greatest at being very specific and clear. And so, for the most part, a wide variety of industries, whether it's environmental or the financial sector or the health industry, cybersecurity, you name it. The agencies were left with trying to figure out what to do,
Yeah.
or there were new developments and new things that happened technologically where the agency was presented with a challenge and said, we should really be doing something about this.
Yeah.
And so was that within their regulatory jurisdiction based on the statute or not? Sometimes we didn't know.
Right.
But if the agency's interpretation of that statute to fulfill whatever it was trying to do from a regulatory perspective was within the realm of reason, the courts would defer to the agencies.
Mhm.
And so much so that it became an issue for conservative jurists and conservative movements in the country that said, it seems as if we're not just deferring to the agencies, we're almost turning a blind eye to
Right.
what the agencies are doing. The deference is becoming so deferential, if you will,
Right.
that the nature of review is becoming almost a rubber stamp. And that isn't good. We don't like that.
Right.
And so for the last 10 years or more, conservative judges led by now Justice Gorsuch on the Supreme Court were hinting that they wanted to revisit this whole principle of deference to an agency when interpreting congressional intent or statutes passed by Congress. And then sure enough, a very sympathetic case comes along. The old expression, bad facts, make bad law, or vice
Right.
versa. Yeah, and it was a very sympathetic case. These small fishermen were being asked to pay for monitors to sit on their boats to monitor their catches. And they said, wait a minute, this is really expensive. We don't have, we're just small companies. We don't have the time or the money to do all this. And they challenged the regulation. But when the challenge advanced through the courts, the question, developed from just the hearing and just the monitor to Chevron.
Right.
And so, in fact, when the Supreme Court granted cert on those two herring cases, it specifically asked whether the Chevron deference principle should be revisited. That was the question presented.
Yeah.
And so the fishermen get really high-powered Supreme Court practitioners all of a sudden. I bet they never thought that would happen.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And they go to the question of whether Chevron should be overturned or not. And once the court grants cert on a question like that, Nick, it's pretty clear what direction they're going. They're not saying, "Oh, should we overturn Chevron? Pretty please." No, they're saying this is what we're thinking of doing. So the only question, really, in the minds of many people was like, how far were they going to go? Was it going to be a complete abdication of the principle? Was there going to be some middle ground or whatnot? And I think the last time we spoke, I indicated to you that the oral arguments, to me at least, revealed that there was no such middle ground. None.
Right. No.
The oral arguments, the justices were literally begging the government to say, okay, if we don't want to do this, if we don't do Chevron deference, what else could we do? What other, and nobody was able to define it for them in a way that made any sense. So it seemed pretty clear to me that it was on its way out. And sure enough, it was. And the court decided 6-3 with Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, writing the ruling that the principle had outlived its usefulness and it was no longer going to be in place. And the last thing I'll say before you follow up is that, the main reason that the Chief Justice said that it no longer had currency, the principle no longer had currency, is that it felt that the application of that deference had improperly minimized the role of the judiciary and to a certain extent the role of Congress with respect to the role of the executive agency branches. That was kind of the gist of what his ruling was. And of course, again, living in my household with my wife, this was like the best because it was like a separation of powers argument. It was what's the role of the three branches of government, which is kind of like, her bailiwick. But in essence, that's really what the court was saying is that, deference to an extent where you're hardly even really exploring what the agency did, really, seems to ignore the role of what judges do. And it certainly seems to ignore, hey, what's the burden on Congress when it writes these laws in the first place? So I think a big part of the Chief Justice's rationale was that as applied over the years, the principle went from, perhaps one of good governance and allowing agencies to do its work in a way, that didn't get interfered with all the time, to a point where the agencies were just given too much authority, too much power, to the exclusion of the other two branches of government.
Interesting. And I really do want to spend a lot of time talking about that power dynamic and the shift. But before we dive down that path, so it's gone. So what's in place of it now? Or what is the standard by which we should start determining, how litigation is going to be sorted out?
Well, a couple of things. One, there's going to be a lot of litigation to sort it out.
Yeah.
That's the first thing, because the answer is that there's no one standard.
Right.
The answer is by giving the authority to judges to decide more in the first instance whether the agency is on the right track in interpreting whatever statutes, at issue. I'm not, saying it's going to be this way, but there's like 850 some odd federal judges. In theory, you could have 850 different standards, right? You could have lots of different standards depending on what court is reviewing what case. And litigants aren't stupid. They're going to be bringing cases in courts where they feel they have a chance of winning.
Right.
And so the situation could be that you have not one standard, but multiple standards. And the worst part is that you could have different rulings and different interpretations of the same statute from different courts in different parts of the country.
Right.
And that's what I think the dissent, the minority in the Loper case, was really upset about. They said, great, you want to give power to the judges, but like, first of all, who are they? Why are they now all of a sudden the experts in doing all this? And second, you realize that this is going to be potentially chaotic because you can see different rulings from different parts of the country dealing with the same exact provision, and then industry and the regulated community in general is left shrugging his shoulders like, what do I do? Do I have to figure out like what state I'm in and then figure out, how I comply with a certain regulation? So I think your question goes to the problem, not so much that I could define a standard, because I can't, but it goes to the problem that you're going to see great variations on how judges are going to deal with this. Now, what it also means is that judges are now going to be exploring the agency's records and the agency's decision-making process even more so than before. I think the Chevron deference principle made it seem like courts would look at a record and the agency would say, here's what we did. Some people said this, some people said that, but we think this is the best, and here's why. We did some studies. And the court would say, yeah, good enough.
Sounds good.
You're the experts. That makes sense. I'm not going to, go into explore that. But now the message from the Supreme Court is to the judges, no, you should explore that. That's your job. Your job is to see if that interpretation is correct, and how the judges do that, based on what information, the way the agencies have to put together their records before, they get challenged, or in anticipation of a challenge, that's going to change dramatically. And so, my fear is that, the answer to your question is there is no articulable standard.
Right.
And it depends on where you're at and what you see. Now, this is develop over time, and it could very well be that as decisions percolate through the system over not just 1 year, but over years, over several years, the nature and the scope of what courts are going to review and how they're going to review it could coalesce, right? There could be a better understanding of what courts are looking for. But between now and then,
all bets are off. Okay.
Yep.
So, because just even thinking about conceptually, like judges have different backgrounds, they have different interests, they have different, I won't say abilities, but they're just very different people. So even getting the same case going to two different judges, you'll get two different outcomes. So that sounds kind of
In
terrifying.
theory, it's possible. When I was in law school at UVA, I remember some of the building was closed off during the semester because they had a special course for judges, federal district court judges, and certain appellate court judges around the country. And it was a course, I think it was called, if I remember, Science for Judges.
Okay.
It was a course saying, okay, congratulations, you've got lifetime appointment.
Right.
Now, guess what?
Right.
You're not just going to be dealing with the same kind of cases that you were dealing with before you became a judge, if you were in private practice, or if you were in the government, or you were a plaintiff's lawyer or defense lawyer. The scope of what you're about to see before you has just expanded quite dramatically.
Yeah.
And one portion of that is going to be a bunch of cases, whether they're administrative cases, you name it, where the core issue is very technical.
Right.
Very technical. How do you do this? How do you deal with all these sorts of things? And part of the course was like, Science 101 for these men and women. Right. And part of the course was part, once you have a sense of this, what do you do with this? How do you then apply it to the legal standards? I dare say that course should be oversubscribed now if it were going to be offered in Charlottesville in 2024 and 2025, as opposed to 1986 or 87 when I was there. Because judges are going to have to deal with this. They're going to have to deal with this in a way that they didn't before. And I don't think the Chief Justice thinks that's a problem. I think part of his rationale is that's our job. We have to deal with it. Buckle up. Put on your big boy pants and big girl skirts or whatever it may be, and just deal with it, because this is important for you to play a role, and in order to play that role, you have to have that level of understanding. So I mean, one of the things that I'm wondering about, whereas before all these types of cases were purely paper cases,
Yeah.
done on summary judgment, done on agency records. I'm just wondering, is there now a role for expert witnesses
Yeah.
in some of these cases?
Yeah.
Will the courts want to hear from these kind of people? And will they give the government the opportunity to expand on that by presenting not just their records and their documents, but people?
Right. Yeah.
People
Yeah.
who knew about this stuff, and then allow the other side who's challenging to present people too. I mean,
Right.
it could be a brand new way of even litigating these cases, depending on how different courts, want to handle it. So, absolutely, this is a demand on federal judges around the country to, be prepared and to bone up on these things because they just have no idea what's a
Right.
coming. And depending on where companies sit and industries sit and the perception
Mhm.
of favorable jurisdictions, these cases can be brought all over.
Yeah. And, you talk about expert witnesses, and then it becomes like, honestly, which one of those expert witnesses is better at speaking in a courtroom? And that more so than their actual expertise, right? Because you end up having people who have very compelling and good arguments that maybe aren't the best from a scientific standpoint, but are articulated well, versus one that's actually, the better argument, but not said well. And so, man, that kind of opens up a lot of different avenues for that to take.
Yeah,
So,
I mean it's not guaranteed that something like that would happen, but
mm,
I find it hard to believe that a lot of these judges that have come up to the bench through typical criminal law practice or
right,
typical civil practice now all of a sudden confronted with Food and Drug Administration regulations or regulations on biotech or regulations on artificial intelligence and environmental regulations, all these hyper technical things will
yeah,
say,
yeah.
oh yeah, I get that. Yeah, sure. And I think if they're at all humble about what they know and what they don't know, they're going to be seeking out some additional help.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like my experience with some of that is like dealing with like the red wolf, whether or not the red wolf, which is in native North Carolina, whether it counts as a species, whether it should be protected as a critically endangered species. And there's legislation about or litigation about whether the Fish and Wildlife Service had an obligation to protect it. And they were required, like, hey, no, you guys stop doing your conservation, but it's still a listed species, and under the rules, you have to do this. So you're going to be required to do that. And now, I'm not saying that it's going to get relitigated, but that would be a prime example of a case where a judge would decide what would be the best course of action, and they would have to determine that based on, I mean, how many people even know red wolves exist? Is my first comment. So
No, you're right, and this and your story relates another decision that we're not spending a lot of time on, but you also know
right.
there was other administrative law decisions that came down at the same time as the Loper decision overturning Chevron, and one of them was overturning interpretation of the statute of limitations for bringing these kind of
Yeah.
regulatory cases.
Yeah.
And now parties could bring cases on regulations that were passed and put into place years ago if they
Right.
can demonstrate to a court that they're now first being injured by that regulation today. And so, yeah, let's say the Fish and Wildlife Service finalized its plan for the red wolf, and now somebody comes along and they have some interests that are affected by the habitat conservation area for that rule,
Yeah.
and they say, "Oh, this is harming me. I can't use my land the way I want to." In theory, that party now has jurisdiction to bring a claim because even if the rule was passed more than 6 years ago, which was the old statute of limitations, if they can show
Right.
their harm today, they could bring that case. So that potentially opens up the regulatory books for years now
Hmm.
for parties to potentially challenge cases. So not only is there going to be more litigation and more people feeling they have a shot at challenging regulations in the ordinary course, but there's a possibility that regulations that we thought were long settled and have been
Yeah.
implemented for years could now be challenged in court with that other ruling expanding the statute of limitations. So I mean, when I say there's going to be more litigation, that's the understatement of the year.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have to ask a follow-up then. Like, so that has to be part of the consideration, right? When they're making this determination, we're going to change this. We know this is going to flood the courts, I think is the way I'll phrase that. Uh, in that case, there's going to be cases that are going to come up. There's going to be so many. There's no way they're going to be able to get through all these in a timely and efficient manner. So, like, how on earth do they manage that surge that's going to come or that is coming?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the things that Congress just did, they had a hearing on Chevron.
Hmm.
And to their credit, to the committee's credit, one of the questions they were asking was, how many more people do we need to hire?
Right.
You
Right.
know, they were asking that straight out because, you know, again, we said the burden on the judges to be more adept. The burden on Congress now is higher because, you know, now they're going to be really confronted with folks coming out of the woodwork to say, okay,
Hmm.
if this was at all ambiguous, we need you to act. We need you to amend such and such a statute. We need you to write a new law addressing fill in the blank. And they're going to be confronted with lobbyists and interest groups trying to say, hey, look, you know, we have something that needs to be handled here, and unless you're clear in your direction to whatever agency has authority, you know, this problem may not be addressed. And so now all of a sudden Congress and its committees and its staffers are going to be confronted with this burden as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of, you know, hiring going on. I don't know if it's enough to move the unemployment rate.
Right.
And it seems, but which is already pretty low. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
seeing at least in this area, you know, again, it's like inside the Beltway. You know, no matter what happens, it seems we seem to thrive. You know, with all these new rules. But
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of need for people to assist all the branches of government to deal with the aftermath of this.
Yeah, and so shifting to Congress a little bit too, because like I think, like I say, there's two parts of this: is what the court is doing, and then Congress's role now. So Congress's role, uh, in my estimation, is are they taking on some of those agency decisions, or are they still saying to the agency, well, you said you should do this. We agree or disagree with what you said, and you should actually do that instead. Like, what are they actually going to be doing with agencies? How are they going to work with them to address some of these challenges?
Who's in charge, right? You
Yes.
know, who's in charge is one of the questions, because
Yeah.
if the tendency or the belief is that, you know, we're just fine if agencies do less, I mean, that could be a result, right?
Right.
And, you know, we're not going to necessarily compel the agencies to do stuff if we feel that when agencies do stuff, it creates trouble.
Right.
On the other hand, even the little p political you know, inclination to allow agencies to do less can easily be eclipsed by a public crisis, a public
Right.
health crisis, an environmental crisis, a financial crisis, what, you know, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden Congress is going to be in a headlong dash to try to address something, you know,
Right.
and let's use something that's non-environmental, you know, AI. You know, it's changing week by week. It's developing week by week. And as some concerns get, you know, elevated, all of a sudden Congress may be confronted with, well, we have to do something
Right.
in the environmental space, you know, the forever chemicals and PFAS, you know, litigation's exploding all around the country. All this is going on. Does Congress want to do something about that? You know,
Right.
or are they satisfied with EPA moving forward by expanding the definition of covered chemicals under RCRA or cleanups under CERCLA or you name it? You know, Congress may have to do something because they feel that if they don't, you know, it's being imposed upon them by, you know, private litigants or by states doing things on their own or whatnot.
Right.
So my sense is that even a Congress that would be less inclined to allow agencies to go off and do stuff
Right.
may find themselves forced to write stuff and forced to write legislation so they can define and control what the agencies, you know, end up doing. So, you know, current events could play a big role in that, Nick, not just
Mhm.
the political predilections of a left-leaning or a right-leaning Congress.
Right.
They sometimes have to confront stuff that falls on their doorstep.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like in my mind like cryptocurrency with FTX, right? And an area that people say, oh, we don't want all the regulations the banking industry has. Then FTX happened, and they're like, okay, we want some regulations. We want some. We don't want zero. We want some. But finding that balance is kind of what we're going to be going through. Is that?
Right. And a lot of the statutes that I've seen in the past, you know, would have, you know, very general standards, you know, we should do this or that. And then it would end with, and such an agency whatever it is,
Hmm.
within 180 days, it's usually 180 days. I don't know why they settled
Yeah,
on
right,
that.
right. Yeah, yeah, it is.
But
Yeah.
within 180 days, shall write regulations on such and such. And that
Hmm.
was it. That's all they said. And my view is that's not going to cut it anymore.
No, no.
Yeah, they're going to have to say with 180 days, you write regulations, and the regulations shall cover 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right?
Right.
They're gonna have to be try to be more specific. And so think about it. Think of the ship where an agency would propose regulations. There'd be a comment period. The document would be flooded with comments in the Federal Register. The agency would consider them and maybe amend or maybe not amend the regulation to a final rule. Now, shift all those comments from the Federal Register to lobbying a Congress,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
and that same direction, those same practical, here's what we're worried about, here's how it should work, you should know about it, is going to be on the desks of the congressional committees and the staffers when they're dealing with these laws in the first instance. That doesn't mean the agencies won't also see it, but now Congress may be seeing a lot more of that and in a lot greater specificity.
interesting. That's quite interesting. So, hmm. And are they equipped to deal with this new is it, again, that's my first question. It's like, how are they going to handle all of this new lobbying? Because there's already, I don't know if you know this, Fred, there's a ton of lobbying that already happens in inside the Beltway. So if we're going to see an increase in this, especially when we get something bigger, like trying to handle climate change, for example, which I don't even think is in the regulations, like specifically written into clean water or clean air.
Right.
Um, how do you handle, how is Congress going to be handling dealing with that?
Yeah, it's going to be a big learning curve. I think it's not like there's not experts there already, but
Right.
to me, it's the volume, volume, volume.
Right.
It's the
Exactly.
quantity of all the stuff that they're going to have to confront in every different discipline. It's just going to be immense. And so, yeah, I think they're a little bit scared up there, to tell you the truth, because this has unleashed on them a much greater obligation to do things, and the demands are going to be even greater, and they're going to be more, nitty gritty. They're going to be
Right.
more microscopic in terms of the things. It's going to be not just, oh, please regulate such and such an industry, or we need rules or protections against X, Y, or Z, Congress. It's going to be, we need protection against this, and here's exactly how you should do it.
Right.
And here are the
Right.
things that need to be done. And if you do this, be careful of that. And if you do that, be careful of this. I mean, I could just see, head spinning already
Right.
up there on how to do this. And it's hard enough to write legislation and pass legislation as it is now. Never
Exactly.
mind the type of legislation that may be necessary in response to the new, LOPR standard. The original Clean Air Act was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long.
Right.
There haven't been many like that since.
Right.
I'm not talking about like budget bills that go over thousands of pages, but there haven't been many like that since.
Okay.
And when Bill Clinton said the era of big government's over, I remember that famous statement. The era of big environmental statutes has been over for a while.
Yeah.
Query whether it's back, whether it
Mhm.
could be back, whether it's amending existing statutes that haven't been touched for a long time, or writing some other statutes.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, myself included, would express a great deal of skepticism that
Yes.
our friends up the street. I'm looking at the Capitol Dome outside my office. Have the capability of doing this
Yeah.
in the short term. But I think they're going to have to. I think they're going to have to adapt to that. And it may not be an environmental law at first. It could be something else. But we will see soon enough. Not this year, because they're only going to be in session for another few weeks before the election. But
Right.
as soon as there's a new Congress, I think we're going to see what this means,
Okay.
and what they're going to be confronted with next term in 2025. So that's a little bit of a stay tuned thing to see what comes out of it, and in what industries, and in response to what issues.
Yeah.
But that's going to be one of their major tasks in 2025.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, and so I think we've explained like the courts and Congress both having these new roles, new responsibilities. So you talked about power earlier, right? Shifting power back to courts and Congress. Is there a consensus on where that power is ultimately going to reside? So are the courts going to be the official end all be all if there is an issue or is it Congress, or is it genuinely both? They now both share an equal amount of power in terms of managing these laws and these litigations.
In the short term, Nick, it's going to be the courts because challenges and litigation are going to be in front of the courts. They're in front of the court today. I mean,
Right.
the Supreme Court after Loper remanded, 5 or 6 matters that it had on its docket back to the lower courts to say, okay, in light of our ruling, go ahead,
Yeah,
do your
yeah.
thing. Let's
Yeah,
see.
do your thing. Yeah.
And so there's going to be rulings and decisions that can come out this year.
Okay.
And there's going to be more cases filed. So the courts have the capacity, even with what we said before in terms of do they have the knowledge, but they certainly have the capacity to handle cases and rule on cases more quickly than Congress has the capacity to pass laws.
Right.
So to me, the action is going to be in the judiciary first.
Gotcha.
Because the decisions will roll out, the interpretations of Loper in any particular industry is going to roll out, and we're going to see them all around the country. And that's going to happen starting now.
Right.
Starting this summer and fall, we're going to start seeing those rulings, and that's going to continue into next year. So without a doubt, I don't think of the two, there's no question in my mind that the action is going to be in the courts, first of all.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And from a social standpoint, people living their everyday lives, seeing this, uh, agencies historically have been the groups of federal governments that people approve of the most. Not saying that they all universally like, oh, agencies are great. It's just compared to Congress and other systems of government, they're higher. Their approval rating is higher in the general public. Are we going to see uh, agency approvals tank? Are we going to see judicial approvals shift based on how they handle these kinds of things? Is there a social element to this that maybe is a new thing for all of these branches of government to actually deal with?
And that's interesting. I gave a lecture on these cases at a conference a few weeks ago, and one of the questions I posed, I didn't have an opinion. One of the questions I posed to the audience was whether we felt that the impact of the ruling was worse for little d democracy
Right.
or better.
Right.
And the theory was that, approaching an agency, writing to an agency, dealing with an agency regulator, was somehow a little bit more little d democratic than the
Right.
court system because of the impediment of money and resources necessary to approach the courts.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
The whole idea is like, oh yeah, you can file a case and you too can get all the way to the Supreme Court.
Right. Right.
It's very romantic, but
Yes.
it isn't necessarily true. But to find the right person in an agency, pick up the phone, call them, make a FOIA request, all that kind of stuff. Meet with somebody about a problem you're having, with a permit or something. That kind of happens, right? And so the question is, if you're shifting the authority away from the agencies to the courts, is that less democratic in some ways? Does it become, harder
Right.
for everyday people or even, businesses large and small to get their audience?
Right.
And there was a split, there was a split in the audience, frankly. I mean, some people felt that, no, I mean, courts, that's why we have associations. That's why, there's, people that represent folks pro bono, et cetera. Other people said, no, I mean, we've relied on the agencies to do this and to help us out day to day for years
Right.
now. And it's easier for, a small business or, mom and pop to try to get some answers, even with the bureaucracy, that's,
Right.
it's relatively easier. And I just don't know what the answer is. I know
Okay.
that the courts right now are suffering a lack of confidence, maybe from the top down for a whole variety of reasons. And we've seen a vast number of judges appointed that were conservative leaning in the prior administration, and a vast number of over 200 judges that are more left leaning, by
Right.
this administration. So
Right.
the question is, does that even things out, or does that make it less popular because people get the impression that, oh, the justice that we're going to get depends on who we're sitting in front of,
Right. Right.
and who they were appointed by. And so it's really hard to say how that's going to all shake out. And but on the whole, I think the notion of just picking up a phone and trying to get some guidance from your agency or whatnot, agencies are going to be very reluctant to do that
Right.
because they know that people are going to be looking over their shoulders very carefully. And I don't know. I'll leave it to the audience to decide whether they think it's more or less democratic, because I think that's a hard question.
Right, right. That's it's very interesting, and all the more reason why we're going to keep being able to talk about this for years. And it's just it's not going away. Like we said, it's unprecedented in lots of ways, and this is just another one. Um, and so yeah, that's a great coverage of Chevron. I appreciate your thought. Um, One last thing I want to end on, and I don't know if you've seen the news recently, but there's a new presidential candidate
Oh,
for the
really?
Democratic Party. Yeah, yeah,
Kennedy?
yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
100%. Biden is no longer running. And like I say, I don't want this to be a political conversation, but from an environmental policy standpoint, when something like this happens, again, another unprecedented thing that no one has seen. As far as in the environment goes, is there a change in how we're going to be looking at policy with a new candidate?
yeah, I think the short answer is yes. And again, you're delving a little bit into the world of political punditry. I don't think it's very controversial to say that had President Biden remained in the campaign,
Hmm.
the laser beam focus of the campaign was going to be him.
Right.
How's
Right.
he doing? Did he
Yes.
slip on the stairs of Air Force One? Did he stumble when giving a speech? Did he, stare off into the, background at a meeting? Did he fall? I mean, it's going to be
Right.
all about him. And I think that's why he and his advisors, reached the conclusion that if they, were to continue getting through all that and talking about whatever they wanted to talk about, whatever their, they perceive their accomplishments to be, or their initiatives, were going to be drowned out by the politics of personality.
Right.
And it was, you could think that's fair or unfair, but I think that's what was
Yeah.
going to happen. It was happening already.
Yes.
When you take that out of the equation, and you can no longer only be talking about an individual's age and their capability and their health and whatever, all of a sudden there's a window to talk about stuff, to talk about policy
Right.
more than the person. Now, trust me, this is American politics, and there's going to be plenty of stuff about the persons and the
Right.
personalities, right? That doesn't go away.
Right. Of
But
course.
but I think there is a window for the vice president and President Trump to highlight their policy differences and what they think the relative advantages and disadvantages of those policy differences are.
Hmm.
And I don't think, besides potentially reproductive rights, besides potentially foreign policy and the role of NATO and Ukraine and stuff like that, I think all of a sudden environmental issues and climate issues kind of creep up into the top five
Yeah.
of issues, whereas before I don't think it would have cracked the top 10 or top 15,
Right.
given everything else that was going on. And I think there's going to be a great incentive for the vice president, and a perception that her potential voters are going to be more energized by these types of issues
Right.
to sort of harp on those. And so, and then similarly, I think if you're talking about the Trump campaign, they're going to say, hey, if that's what they want to do, bring it on. Because we feel that the emphasis on these issues has been too much, and it's
Right.
cost the economy too much, and it's interfered too much with individual choice or whatever, and they may be willing to have that discussion. So all of a sudden, and
Yeah.
literally this all of a
Yeah.
sudden
All of a sudden.
overnight, you go
Oh,
from a situation where it's all about him and the person to potentially a lot more, the particular issues. And this is
gotcha.
one of them where the differences between the candidates and the campaigns could not be more stark.
Yeah.
It's just totally different approaches to these questions in every way. And so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we're in a 100-day sprint as we're
Yeah.
recording this today, literally a
Yes.
100-day
100 days.
sprint,
Yep.
unlike anything we've ever seen. PS, European and other countries, they do campaigns in weeks, a matter of weeks. This is for
Yeah.
them. It's like, what?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
still slow. 100 days
Right.
is still too slow. But all
Yeah.
of a sudden for America, we're not used to this. It's going to be a sprint. And so we will quickly see if, these types of issues kind of rise to the top, and the candidates decide that this is a way that we're going to be able to distinguish ourselves and to energize the folks that we we feel we need to get that, middle strata,
Right.
those 5 or 6% of the people that are going to decide the election for the entire country,
Right.
whether this is going to grab their imagination, whether this is going to, grab their attention. And I think the odds are a little bit stronger than not that environmental issues could fall into that bucket, just because of the stark differences between, the two candidates in that regard. And so, it's literally changing day by day, and she's literally the vice president's literally, ramping up her stump speech, and it's changing day by day.
Right.
But soon enough, and this will appear, I think, at the convention in August, to see how these issues, find themselves in, in her acceptance speech and the speeches from the other prominent, Democrats that'll be on TV. Man, I think we're going to see a lot more.
Right.
But P.S. I don't think the Republicans will shy away from it either.
No.
Because I think they believe that they have a political winner in terms of what they perceive as overregulation in certain areas too. So, it's going to be a very stark difference, and I think there's going to be a lot of direct conversation.
Yeah, and then so people will start looking for that. Listen to those things. You'll see environmental pop up. I totally agree. Climate change is a big topic, and yeah, it's a really interesting take. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
So,
and again, it's not a matter of which approach you think is right or wrong.
No,
it's a matter of for years, people claim that environmental issues are one of the things they care about most.
Yes.
In life, they care about providing for their families. If you ask them, the priority is making sure your kids, are better off than you are.
Yeah.
But invariably, they say, we want to leave the world a better place.
Right.
And then when it came to the election, it disappeared.
Right.
It disappears.
Right.
And it's been hard to understand why. Something that's clearly a value that people share when it comes to politics, drops away. And again, people say, because people are voting their pocketbooks, and I get it.
Yeah.
But there's a chance that, unlike many elections in the past, that this could now rise to the top because people will be forced to talk about it in very specific terms.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What are you going to do about electrification? Yes or no? What are you going to do about emissions? Yes or no? You're challenging, this rule and regulation. Should there be none? Or should there be something different? If so, what? And if I'm a reporter and I'm on the debate stage and I'm a moderator of those debates, it didn't happen the first debate. There was zero coverage of it. Zero.
Yeah.
But if I'm a moderator now moving forward and I'm not dealing with, can you do the job, Ms. Harris? Are you going to be alive in 4 years? If I'm not dealing with that, I'm going to be asking her that question. And then I'm going to be asking, President Trump, okay, how would you deal with these questions? If so, why not? Like I said, it's not 100% certainty, but I think the odds are better than not that you're going to see attention on these things on the campaign trail and advertising, from PACs and people that are interested in promoting these issues and advocacy groups. You're going to see so much activity in the next 100 days. I don't think it's going to be matched that we've in recent memory.
Yeah, and that's another. I love when we do predictions on the show. That's actually one of my favorite things. So
I'm not doing that prediction though.
Not co-signing it.
I'm not doing the bottom line prediction. Don't come near asking me that.
I love it. Well, before we get you out of here,
I predicted a year ago.
Yeah.
You remember when we did the live show a year ago, I said one of the things that was crazy about 2024 was the situation where we're dealing with two candidates that most Americans do not want to be there.
Right.
And I said, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
And I was right. That was a correct prediction because it was so much so that one of the candidates is no longer there.
Yeah.
And the last poll I saw, it was crazy. It was like 80 or 85% of Americans agreed with this decision to step down.
Yeah.
85% of Americans don't agree on their favorite flavor of ice cream. Or pie.
Yeah.
But yet they agreed about that. And so, a year ago, I will claim credit for being right, that the craziness of Americans not liking either candidate was going to create a whole bunch of uncertainty and possibilities. So I was right, but I ain't going now predicting how this is going to turn out. No way. I mean, I'll make a prediction, on midnight on November 5th when I see
There
the
we
votes
go.
being counted.
Oh, that's great, Fred. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I always enjoy it. Is there anything else you want to discuss before we let you go?
No, just enjoy the Olympics. I mean, I guess I will predict. I think Simone Biles is going to win, 4 gold medals.
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah,
I
she's
think she's at
incredible.
the top of her game. I
Yeah,
think she is, you know, free of so many burdens and otherwise, and so much so I read she's just adding new elements to some of her routines. I just think her confidence is sky high. So I think my prediction is you're going to see a performance for the ages out of Simone Biles in the
yeah,
next couple of weeks. So how
yeah.
about that?
There we go. Perfect. That's a good one. We'll take it, Fred. Thank you so much for joining us.
See you, man.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for joining us, Fred. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you so much for listening. See you, everybody. Bye.